Welcome to the Overwatch League Power Rankings Countdown, where I do count down the worst to best Overwatch League teams heading into Season 2. Today, I bring you guys number 15, the Paris Eternal. Be sure to click that like button if you enjoy my content, and also subscribe to my channel if you want to stay updated on all future Overwatch League coverage. There is nobody on YouTube who will cover the league for you every single day. You'll never miss a beat. Be sure to join the family, and shout out to everybody who is already involved in the channel. I love you guys so much. So let's jump into it now. Today I bring you guys the Paris Eternal, the 15th ranked Overwatch League team. Just to catch everybody up who hasn't been following my rankings so far, at number 20 we have the Chengdu Hunters. Not a big surprise there. At number 19, we do have the Budget Nightmare, the Washington Justice. Moving on to 18, we have the first team from Season 1, the Boston Uprising. Number 17, the Florida Mayhem. And of course, number 16, which was a shock to some of you, the Houston Outlaws. So now that we're all caught up, let's go ahead and begin the video off by covering who the Paris Eternal owners are, where they come from, how much they're worth. So the main investor and owners in the Overwatch League team Paris Eternal is McCourt Global, who is owned by Frank McCourt, who also owns a French football club called Olympique de Marseille, and I totally butchered that, I know, and he also formerly owned the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team. So you know, if you sold the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team, you have a ton of money. The LA Dodgers are the second most expensive team in the MLB. They're worth around $3 billion, and this guy sold them. Now, as I said earlier, he owns a French soccer team, which is worth a lot of money, and he is the CEO and owner of McCourt Global, also another billionaire company who does investments ranging in random things like real estate and finance, sports, media. Obviously, they're in the Overwatch League now. So the owners of the Paris Eternal are rich. They're absolutely loaded, so they should have no issues making sure these players are in a good environment. They have a nice house, a chef, psychologist, just anything in general that the players need in order to be successful. They should be able to provide because they have limitless money. And I like the fact that these owners have experience in at least traditional sports, whether it is soccer or baseball. They have owned high-level teams, so they should know what it takes and what you need to provide to be a successful franchise in a sports league. And I think that could translate well into the Overwatch League. So overall, for the Paris Eternal, I do think their owners are fit to be in the Overwatch League. So now let's move on and talk more about the managers, the coaches, and the players of this team. Starting off with the general manager, we have Max. And before we get into this, you guys will notice a trend with a lot of the management and some of the players. They do come from the same places. They have worked together a lot, which is sort of a good sign, but also could be a sign of them just wanting to get people they know and sticking with what's comfortable rather than going out and getting what could be great. So the general manager of the Paris Eternal is Max, and he is a former team manager of Rogue. And if you don't know who Rogue is, they are a former Overwatch team. Prior to the Overwatch League, Rogue was one of the most dominant teams in the Western scene. Specifically, when they were boot camping in North America, they dominated. They won about 8 major events in a row. So it's good we get out of the way who Rogue is, because again, they are going to be brought up because a lot of the people involved in the Paris Eternal come from that team or organization. So Max was the team manager of that roster in the Overwatch division for Rogue. He worked with them for about 2 years. Even after the Overwatch League started and the Overwatch Rogue roster disbanded, he continued to work with Rogue, and eventually he did land the job with Paris Eternal. They made him the official general manager. Overall, it seems like a decent choice coming out from Paris Eternal. Max has been involved in Overwatch for a very long time and also is from France. So it kind of fits their agenda. He probably promised them that he did have that experience and that he could get a lot of good players to come over, which he did. So overall, I like the general manager from the outside looking in. It's a good signing. Now moving on to the team manager, we have Liz Lynn. And I'd say she's a pretty interesting addition to this team. Again, she does come from Rogue, where she was like their personal trainer and just nutritionist, but is now going to be fulfilling the role of team manager, which is definitely more than just physical training, stuff like that. So I'm not really too sure where I stand on this one. She has experience with Rogue again, probably was friends with Max, so I can see why he selected her in that regard, but we're just gonna have to wait and see what she can do for this team. I also think she like dated AKM or Unco, or she dated somebody from the Rogue roster. Not too sure exactly who, but that did happen. It was probably AKM. He's dated so many chicks. Anyways, let's move on now to the next guy, who is going to be the head coach of the roster, we have Damon. Now, Damon is a good selection in my opinion. He has a lot of experience. He has coached a lot of previous teams, one again being Rogue, but after that he did move into the Overwatch League and he coached the LA Valiant during Season 1, who was a really strong team. So I can see why they selected Damon. Obviously he comes from Rogue as well, but I do think his experience in Season 1 of the Overwatch League as a coach, especially with their new player soon, is going to be crucial for them. Now moving on to the rest of the coaching staff for the Paris Eternal, which I really like. Starting off with the player development coach, we have Feifei or Fifi, not really too sure how to pronounce this, but he comes from Eagle Gaming, where he head coached players like Nico, who are on this roster, to a championship in European Contender Season 2. And that team was definitely fundamentally really good. Their teamwork was great. The strategies they had on GOATs were they were unbeatable. That's why they won. So I really like the addition with Feifei. Now moving on to the next coach, we have Seda, who also comes from a really strong European Contenders team. He was the head coach of Giganti and also the head coach of Team Finland in this year's World Cup. Overall, he's got a lot of experience. He's coached a lot of really good teams, and just like Feifei, I think he is an amazing addition to this roster. Now moving on to the last coach, which I am not as hyped up on, but still excited to see back in the Overwatch League just to know what he can do. We have Kai, the former coach for Dallas Fuel and Houston Outlaws. He has definitely a long history, and it's not the best, but he does have the experience, and I think being put in this position with a whole bunch of other coaches, he can really learn and come into his position and do what the team needs from him. So overall, I really like the coaching staff, and I rate these guys like an 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. They have a lot of solid experience. Their head coach comes from the Overwatch League, where he had great success. But now let's move on to the players, because I really think this is where they're going to lack in Season 2. And I want to start off with the DPS, who probably are the biggest names on this roster. First, we have Soon, former LA Valiant DPS player who really had a great season, especially near the end when he really started to pop off on that Widowmaker. Going into Season 1 Overwatch League, he was really only known for his Tracer and maybe a little bit of McCree, but most people thought, alright, he's going to play Tracer for this roster, he'll probably carry them, but when it comes to playing other heroes and needing to be flexible, Soon might be a little bit of a risky player to have on your roster as a starter. But that wasn't the case. As I said, near the end of the season in stages 3 and 4, he started to pop off and become one of the best players in the league, and I like the fact that they were able to go out there and trade LA Valiant or pay LA Valiant whatever they needed to get this guy. And for those of you guys who don't know, Soon also did play for that Rogue team prior to the Overwatch League starting, so he does have experience working with Mex, Lizland, and Damon, so that's probably a big reason why they went out and said, hey, we need to get Soon. We love working with him. We know he's a great player. He performed like a god in Season 1. That's the guy we need, and they did it. I love the execution, and I love Soon. This is an amazing pick for this team, and if somebody does carry them, it's going to be him. And now let's move on to his fellow DPS players. Next, we have Shadowburn, who comes from Philadelphia Fusion. Shadowburn is a strong pickup as well, but a lot more of a risky one. Shadowburn could be great, or he could just be average. Going into Season 1 of the Overwatch League, everybody thought Shadowburn and Carpe were going to be one of the deadliest duos in the Overwatch League, and they were pretty decent. Carpe was popping off, and Shadowburn, he was playing as Genji, doing what he does. Overall, though, I feel like he underperformed a bit on Genji during Season 1, but his star performances came from his Pharah play, which was really exciting to see. Shadowburn was one of the best Pharahs in Season 1, even though he didn't get that much playtime. During the end of Stage 1, though, Shadowburn ended up getting replaced by EQO as the main starter on this roster, and slowly as the season went on, it seemed like everybody just forgot about Shadowburn because EQO was so damn good. And of course we have to credit EQO for that, but the main reason I've heard from players in the league, they've said it on my talk shows, on my channel, on Twitter, Shadowburn was benched because he didn't communicate very well. And one of the big reasons why they wanted to start EQO all the time was because of Shadowburn's communication. Kind of worries me for this roster, because I've also heard that Soon isn't really that loud of a player. He doesn't communicate too much. He's more of the guy like, yo, put me in the game, I'll shoot everybody in the head and we'll win, which is fine. It's okay to have a player like that on your roster, but the other DPS player needs to pick up the slack when it comes to communication. So I really don't know where Soon and Shadowburn synergy is going to come into play when it comes to communicating to the team and just setting up big plays. So there is definitely a chance that Shadowburn doesn't get much playtime on this roster. It's really going to be hit or miss. Let's go ahead and move on now though and talk about the next DPS player. We have Danye, who has somewhat of a decent past. He's played for a lot of average contenders teams in the European scene during season 1 and season 2. Never really got too far. The first round of the playoffs was the best he did. He also did make it to the Poland World Cup roster. One good thing about him is that he has shown to be really flexible. He can play the hit scan, he can play projectile, pretty much whatever is needed. If it's Zarya, if it's an off tank, it doesn't matter. Danye will be able to practice it and be decent at it. He's definitely another hit or miss player in the league though. I'm not too sure how well he's going to perform. I'm a little bit worried. But now let's move on to the last DPS player who could also be considered an off tank. We have Nico GDH, who has a lot of experience with a lot of different guys on this roster. He competed for Eagle Gaming, where he was coached by Feifei. They won season 2 of Contenders Europe, where they were dominant on that GOATS roster, and it has been said by a lot of people that Nico was the strongest player there, and he was the reason why it came all together, and he was so great. So right now in GOATS meta, I would look at him as more of a flex tank player rather than a DPS, but he does have a DPS background because he competed with Soon on Rogue, where he was also coached by Damon and under Max and Lizlin and all that, so there's where more experience comes into play. He mostly played the projectile role, specifically Genji, when he played for Rogue in that triple DPS meta, and he was solid. He was a decent role player in my opinion, and I could see him starting over Shadowburn when it comes to Genji just because of the communication. As I said, he's heard to be vocal and the reason why GOATS comes together so well, so I could see Nico and Soon DPS players in a dive meta with Shadowburn sitting on the bench again. But that's going to be Nico and overall the DPS players. I do think again the DPS is their strongest suit on this roster just because of Soon basically. Shadowburn, Nico, and Danye, they're all decent, but I think they're going to be hit or miss. Let's go to move on now to the off tank of this roster. We have Finzi, who does come from an Overwatch League team. He competed for LA Valiant, but he never really got any playtime. But let's go and talk a little bit more about where he comes from previous to the Overwatch League. He was on a European contenders team called 123, who did perform pretty well in season 1 and season 2 prior to the league starting. He also competed for Orglis in Hungary, who were an okay team after Overwatch League started. I think he's a decent off tank, nothing special. The fact that he is the only off tank on this team, if you don't want to count Nico, is a little worrisome, and I don't think he's going to be able to stack up against some of the best in the league like Fury, like Space. But now let's go ahead and move on to the main tanks and start off with Ben Best, who is considered a pretty good main tank in the European scene, mostly for his Reinhardt. I wouldn't say his Winston is that great. I've looked at a few of his games. He comes from Gamers Origin, where he's had a few decent performances in Overwatch contenders, reaching the semifinals a couple times, but most recently he competed in the World Cup for France, and he looked alright, again, like an average player. He is regarded as one of the better main tanks in Europe, but when you're going into the Overwatch League and there's like 10 Koreans who are gods at Winston and Reinhardt, it's going to be tough stacking up against them. So Ben Best, another average player I'd say coming into the league for Paris Eternal. And now moving on to their next main tank player, we have LA Cloudy, who was kind of unknown. He competed for Team Giganti in Overwatch Contenders, where he did have a decent run in season 1. He was signed over to the Florida Mayhem as their academy main tank, and then as soon as Mayhem Academy signed him, Paris Eternal decided they wanted him on their Overwatch League roster, probably due to Seda working with Giganti and knowing that LH Cloudy was a decent main tank. I'd say he's kind of in the same boat as Ben Best, maybe even a little worse. These guys are just unproven when it comes to Overwatch League talent since they have only competed in European contenders. I don't really know where they're going to stack up, but I don't think it's going to be that great. I'd probably rank them in like the bottom 7 main tanks in the league, so I'm not too hyped up on them. Let's now move on to the support players for this roster, starting off with Hip, who was a teammate with Ben Best on Gamers Origin, and he also competed with that Eagle Gaming roster that got first place in contenders with Feifei and Nico, and overall is a pretty solid flex support. In my opinion, I think he was one of the best in European contenders, and if there was somebody who I don't think is average that is joining this team besides Soon, I would think it is either Hip or the next guy we're going to talk about, which is Cruz, who comes from Toronto Esports and the North American contenders team. I like the backline so far of this roster. If you were going to go for Western players, I would have chose Hip or Cruz as well, but again, do I really think they're going to be able to compete with the best of the best like Jonak and Arc and Animo? I don't think so. I'd say they're probably maybe top 10 at best, and that's probably pushing it. They also have another flex support player, which is Gray, who I don't think will play over Hip, but we will just have to see. Overall, this roster, as I said, just it seems really average besides Soon. They did pick up some of the better talent in Europe, but look at season 1 of the Overwatch League. Which team was filled with the best of the best talent from Europe? we had the Florida Mayhem. Well, we know exactly what happened to the Florida Mayhem. Sure, a big part of it was probably the management and the coaches, but the players really underperformed despite being big names, so I kind of see that Florida Mayhem vibe with this Paris Eternal roster. I do think they'll underperform and end up being one of the lower teams in the league. Now, that's up to you guys whether or not you agree or disagree with me. Be sure to let me know down in the comments, and if you want to stay updated on all my Overwatch League power rankings and stay covered with the Overwatch League when it starts, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Likes really do help my channel grow, so I'd appreciate that. Thank you for watching, guys. I'm out of here. Peace.